Okay, so just to make sure that you are in the right session, we are going to talk about network automation using Chef. So I'm going to spend next 30 minutes talking about network use cases for automation, what is the driver behind automation. Then we'll talk about how to use Chef to do network automation, and then generally, how we see network automation evolving. My goal is to complete this in 30 minutes. Feel free to ask me any questions along the way. Just raise your hand and we can get started. Okay, so my name is Parag Bajaria and I am product manager for programmability and automation products at Juniper. I've been working at Juniper for about 6 years, and before that I was an engineer. I worked at various startups doing routing protocols. So I've been in networking land for quite a while. So before we kind of get into the meat of the presentation, I want to just get a little bit idea of what is people here's background. So I'm going to ask a couple of questions. So one is, have you ever configured a router or a switch before? Excellent. Are you responsible for configuring network gear in your day jobs? Very good. And I'm hoping that you know what Juniper does. Okay. So that's good. Then I think I am going to force, this was my backup slides for people who have not seen a network device before, and I'm going to fast forward these things and really give you a brief introduction about Juniper products. So we have whole sets of different products. We have security products, which are firewalls, IDS, IDP products. We have switching products, and then we have routing products. The pricing for this ranges all the way from $500 to $5 million. So we do all level of scale as far as networking gear goes. So let's get into what is the driver for network automation. So what are the use cases? The first use case that we all encounter is day zero provisioning. I got my router shipped from Juniper, Cisco, whoever, and I need to configure it. Now, typically, in a small shop, we do configuration through manually, basically typing in through CLI, or we write some scripts to make our jobs a little bit easier. But things get complicated very soon. Let's take an example of a mid-sized enterprise, right? You may have in that mid-sized enterprise 3 different kinds of products. You may have security product, routing product, and switching product. Each one of them is configured a little bit different than the other. Then you may have what role a particular device plays in the network. So you could have a switch that is top of rack or a switch that is sitting in the closet, and that configuration is also different. You may have configuration that you may have to do based on the location. So a branch office configuration will be different from the main office configuration. So as you can see, that the complexity of configuration keeps increasing. Even day zero configuration increases. And this is a perfect problem to solve using automation. The second use case is day-to-day maintenance. I mean, you guys have done some amount of maintenance on your switches and routers based on what you told me. So day-to-day maintenance, what do you do? Well, on a switch, let's say you set up VLANs. On a firewall, if you detect a new security threat, you want to push firewall rules down to your devices. In case of a service provider environment, you may be doing subscriber management. You show up a new subscriber, you want to program in, you want to configure a policing policy. So many day-to-day tasks can be easier and done fast with automation. The third use case is orchestration, which is that you're doing a bunch of things together. which means that, let's take again an example. Let's say you're spawning a web server. So you need to assign that web server to a proper VLAN. You need to put a firewall rule to protect it. You may have to configure a load balancer. You may have to configure a caching server, so which requires you to synchronize across many, many devices. And again, an excellent problem for automation, because if we do it manually, there is a good chance something is going to fail. And there are probably many other use cases for automation. Now, let me take a quote from one of the pioneers of computing industry. And the key parts of that quote that I love is that automation magnifies the efficiency and automation magnifies the inefficiency. Today, we see that network configuration is driven mostly through a manual process. By that, I not only mean that by typing in things, but even how you get something configured. So if there is a need from IT department to do any provisioning, there's a change ticketing system. And it takes hours and weeks before you get this network set up. And we are living in on-demand world today. Right? Everything server and storage happens in minutes, and things in network happen hours. So by this huge scale up in the data center and a lot of things that we are running, it is becoming pretty obvious that the network is the bottleneck. And the good news here is that we are trying to fix this bottleneck. And how do we go about fixing this? Well, we are going to automate network configuration through Chef and some other tools. Before we get into the specifics of how it works with Chef, I want to just give you guys a little bit information on how you do network configuration and how does it compare to server configuration. So if we look at server world and you look at how do you configure a particular application, you have a config file and you change that config file according to whatever parameters that you want to, okay? And then you restart the service or just sig up it and it picks up the new config and on it goes. Now, this is another example where I'm showing you how MongoDB is configured. So each application has some specific configuration that you tweak. And how have people automated that tweaking of that config? By writing parsers that parse that config file, and then they write to it. Now, one observation you can make is that there is different config file for different applications. So there is a huge variety of different config files that you will see, and each one works a slightly different way. So the parsing of these config files is a difficult job. Luckily, most of the popular applications have been automated, so you don't have to worry about it. Now, looking at that, and let's take a look at network configuration. So you have a set of network devices on which you have various applications running, OSPF, BGP, MPLS, LLDP. These are all network applications. And the way you do configuration of networking devices is typically manually through what we call command line interface, CLI. Now, the way to think about this command line interface is it's like a fancy editor. Okay, it makes your life easier by providing you help in configuring the network device. Okay. Now, typically, the network configuration is done hierarchically. So that means that when you are configuring an interface, you would say config interface, and then you would assign different properties to that particular interface. So IP address, for example, or speed of the port. Okay. So it is structured configuration, how you configure different applications. And by putting a structure on the configuration, it makes it easy, as you will see in next few slides, to automate things because it's organized in a certain way. Okay? So in a sense, network configuration works similar. There is a config file. It's just, there is a big file somewhere sitting in a database, and you're doing same things like you do in server, configure it, and then the application picks it up and on it goes. Okay, now let's talk about how does things work with Chef. So a typical Chef setup, you have workstation, you have Chef server, and then you have various devices. In this case, I'm showing you a network device. And then you would push a cookbook up to Chef server, and in this case, we have created a cookbook called NETDEV, which gets uploaded to the server. Okay. Then next step you do is you put the Chef client on the switch. Now I'm showing you here that how to put a Chef client, which is pretty much like installing a package on the switch. Okay. Most of our newer switches are coming pre-bundled, so you will not have to do this step, but I'm just showing you for you to observe how it happens. And when you execute that command to install the package, what is happening is we are installing a Ruby interpreter, we are installing various Ruby gems to support that, and then we are installing Chef client. Now we have done this work of putting the Chef client on our switches in collaboration with Chef team. Okay, we work together and we built this the first implementation. The way actually we did that is we do have a software development kit that any of our customers or partners can download, and then you can write applications for the router. So we've been open on allowing different applications to run on our routers using our software development kit. Yet another example of how we embrace automation and programmability. Okay, so once you have these things, then the next thing you do is you run the Chef client, and which means that now it's ready to receive recipes and run lists, and magically the switch gets configured. Now that magic is happening through this particular arrow that you see, this XML arrow. What that represents is that in JUNOS or in Juniper products, we have an XML API that's baked into our OS. Okay. So for example, when you do on the command line interface show VLANs, okay, that particular command actually is executing an XML RPC call back to our management daemon. Okay, and each and every command that you do on the command line interface has a corresponding XML RPC call, and you can figure that out just by typing the command and saying display XML. So a request goes in, goes out, and the respective management daemon responds with an XML data. One key thing that you will observe here is that the response that comes back is structured data. It's not text coming back. The advantage of this is that you can parse this data and you can make sense out of it. What is this data that is coming to me? Unlike what we used to do not too long ago, which was writing expect scripts and then scraping the screen. You don't need to do screen scraping in Juniper world. Now what we have done is we have taken this XML API and we have exposed it through different interfaces. One is through an HTTP interface, and another is through NetConf interface. NetConf stands for a protocol called network configuration. Basically, it's an SSH-based protocol, okay, inside which you can exchange, you can do RPC calls. Not only have we exposed this API, but we have created various language bindings on top of that so that you can exercise this API in the language of your choice. So we have language bindings for Perl, PHP, Ruby, Python. We have an implementation for Node also, just as an experiment. But we have done, there is various level of libraries that we have built. And then later on in my slides, I will show you that we have even created a mini framework on top of this to make it NetOps, to be customized for NetOps person, so that you don't have to deal with a lot of NetConf detail. If you want some data, let's say interface statistics, you're directly trying to grab that versus going through this, parsing XML and getting all that data. So we'll talk about it in a little bit. But this is the foundational piece of how Chef works. So Chef recipes get downloaded, and then they get translated to XML call, which configure the router. Now let's take a look at few recipes. So we have implemented, just as a starting point, 4 resources within the switch. And these 4 resources we chose basically the most common things that you do in data center environment. Okay, so I'm not going to explain you these resources because you have the networking background, but I just want you guys to get a feel of what that looks like. So we have a resource that has various properties. In this case, I'm showing you a network interface resource. And writing a recipe to create a new one, it's very easy. Basically, you take that resource, you assign it a name, put some description, assign the various properties. In this case, you would assign the port speed, you would assign the mode of operation, duplex. So similarly, we have things for doing VLANs, for doing layer 2 interface stuff, and then we have things for configuring lag. Lag stands for link aggregation, and basically you use lag for doing redundancy on your links and combining bandwidth of multiple ports. So if you want to see some of these recipes live, working and doing their job, you should come to our demo. We have set up a live demo in booth 110, and just to make sure, to convince you that this is not vaporware, this is real, it is there, and you can come and mess around with these recipes, ask us questions. And the demo itself is quite interesting. It's simple. It gets the point across of what is possible with network automation. Okay. So while thinking about automation, we were thinking about a DevOps approach, the DevOps spirit of automation, which is being open and community driven. So all the automation code that I mentioned till now, and a lot more, is all available on GitHub. Okay, the Chef cookbook in its right location on Chef's site. Okay, we are very welcoming to the community. We want you to take the software that we built. If you need to customize it, do a fork of our GitHub library. And if you think your customizations will be helpful to the community, send us a pull request and we'll pull it in. We want you guys to go and develop new recipes, new even resource types, okay? And we are happy to support that through various forums. So we have a dedicated forum for various automation products. So you can come, ask us questions there, actually get answers from not only us, but from the community itself. We also do hosting of various meetups on these topics. So if you go to Meetup and look for network automation, you'll find the right meetups around this. So come to one of our meetups. We'll do hackathons there, and you can learn a lot more there. Again, the idea is that we want to engage with the community because network automation is at its nascency, and we need the community support to make it mainstream, make our lives easier. We also have all the documentation for the Chef available on our main site. And we also have a dedicated website, which is techwiki.juniper.net, which is only dedicated for all the automation resources. So it has full collection of the resources. So you can see there is a card in front of you, which has all the resources around automation available. So you can just there's a QR code on it, you can scan it and get to the right places to learn about network automation. And finally, yes, we are doing all this under a very liberal BSD style license, so you don't have to worry about any copyright on all that. Okay. Okay, so the main point is that we welcome your community participation. That's how we've designed this automation products, and we would love to engage with you. Okay, so I think I'm going to take a pause because I'm going to shift to another topic about talking about network automation in general, not specific to Chef. So if there are questions that are related to Chef, I'm happy to answer them now.
I have a question. I mean, that's great. You have some privilege for VLANs and labs and stuff like that. But if you go into most large shops and you look at the complex configuration, I'm just not sure it's going to make sense to build abstractions simply. You just order, you start defining BGP, the complexity of something. I don't think the model of this abstraction that you do, because I mean, at the end of the day, it's a stored config, right? And that's different than a server. A server is, a database, an Apache server, right? But that stored config is a living entity and has order and complexity. So I'm not sure that, I guess I'm asking you a question. I mean, do you really think that somebody would build that format of abstraction as opposed to something like a Ruby templating or something like that to build this very complex configuration?
So let me say this, I also don't know. Okay, we are taking a bet on how things will evolve, and we are taking a bet with some of our select partners like Chef, okay, to see how this evolves and whether there is an adoption for this approach. So what I would call is we build what I would frame a minimal viable product where you can do useful things with it. Building new resources is very easy, but that's not your point, I know that. But let's see how things evolve. And if this picks up, it makes it easy to do, then that's great. If it doesn't, then we'll figure out how to pivot to the right place. Was there something you wanted to add?
I'd just like to add to that, because that's been one of my points along the way as we've been doing this. One of the key things that we've tried to incorporate is the building the Juniper specific functionality into that Ruby library, the Python library. So we, especially on like the Python side, for example, we've automated a Python object model of building a commit script, running Ginger templates through that, and applying it ways. So if you're not interested in the Chef or the Puppet sort of configuration language, the same libraries, the same work we're doing to develop the Chef code, the part that goes out and configures the box, that is also exposed to you via our libraries on GitHub. So if you choose to roll your own, or you want some finer grained control, like you don't want like final state definition, you want to strictly control order, that's all built into the library as well, and you can write your own script around that, or patch that into your own existing OS. And I'm happy to discuss that on the board if anyone wants to look at that.
So, like in the traditional approach of network automation always was generate the configuration, and then upload the config and apply it.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if that was necessarily the most effective method, but it's very similar to having like an ERB template, and the template gets generated, and then you write out the configuration, right? But there are some very kind of interesting things that, like, I don't think everybody's ready to change the mindset of how we manage network devices, and we've had this conversation with Don that, like, I mean, and no offense against the network guys, but like, they're going to be the strongest, the hardest people to convince that automation is needed.
Yeah, actually,
and
the state of network configuration is like Control C, Control V from a notepad window into an enable prompt.
And I think we're all in the really early days, and I think everybody's trying to figure this out. So this may not be the right approach, but we got to have the conversation so that we can figure out what the right approach
And I think
is.
the key with like the Chef style integration, especially the particular resources we have today, are primarily around, if I spin up a new database that requires a particular VLAN, we can provision that network service in the same, like, I guess the Git repo that pushed the database and the web server can also push the VLAN chain. So when I roll them back, I roll them all back together. That's part of the reason why today there is an OSPF BGP in there. It's what are the things that would directly relate to
What are the
service
dynamic
provision?
things that would be changing and when I'm provisioning services? Yeah.
One thing I would also add that when we think about Chef and building these resources, we are not thinking Juniper only, right? We are thinking industry-wide resources that are standard way of, so if you have switches from other companies, you can use the same recipes to do the same thing. So we are not narrow-minded about thinking about this problem. We want to solve this problem across the industry. So if you go to our GitHub repo and look at which other vendors are doing this, you will find out that there are other companies also building on top of this.
So they're actually using the same VLAN Jeremy state, good Jeremy stuff, and now every vendor has not only their examples of the same interface name and the same
We kicked it off, and I'm glad to see the adoption of other vendors. And I'm very much in agreement that we haven't figured this out. And let's have a conversation like this. And we have our own opinions that we state on our blogs about how things happen, how we see so stay engaged. Check out our Twitter streams and so on if you want to see what's going on in network automation. And coming to the next topic, this is about the framework that we are working on that is more customized, more directly geared towards network ops. So what we have done is we built a framework in Python, Python just being the first language that we picked. We are hoping to build similar things in Ruby. And there is an open source version of the NetConf client library, the library that is responsible for doing exercising the protocol, NetConf protocol down to the devices. It's an open source library, it's a multi-vendor library. Okay. And what we have done is build abstractions on top of it. I wouldn't even say API, I would say a framework on top of it. The reason for building this framework is that when you are dealing in NetConf, typically you are doing a lot of back and forth in XML. And as we know, XML is not very user-friendly, readable code that you can do when you're dealing with XML. So what we've done is we built some abstractions on top of it. There are two sets of abstractions that we've done. One is for configuration. So what we've done is we made it easy for you to describe the configuration as code snippets. Okay, I would say not even code snippets, text snippets. So you can take the configuration that you have showing up on the router, copy and paste that. So Control-C, Control-V, but you're not doing it on the command line, you're doing it, putting in a text. Now, you can templatize that particular configuration. So if you have variables that you need to substitute, you can templatize this thing. Again, doing both of this in the code or in a file, text file, both are supported. And then we also support you to do configuration based on programming paradigm. So if you want to exercise some of the configuration using programming style versus templates, you can do that too. So all three possibilities are possible. In case 1 and 2, even if you don't know programming per se, you can exercise this functionality of doing this automation just by filling up those files. Now, the second part of automation comes into, I want to know the state of my box, various different things, whether that's interface statistics, whether that's routing table. So what we have done is we have provided an ability to model any state in the router as if it was a database table, and then you can attach views to that database table. So you can have an infinite number of views, and we have created some table views, but you can create your own tables to represent whatever data that you are interested in. So what happens is that now you are, when you are trying to collect different set of information from the router, you can create a simple view, pretty much a YAML file, and there you go. When you run that script, you get all the data that you want without any complications of NetConf, without any complications of even programming in Python. But again, like configuration, if you want to use Python, you want to use the programmatic way to access this, that's also available. Now, in order to make it easy for you to learn this framework, what we have done is we have provided you utilities so that when you fire up a Python shell, you can exercise many of this functionality by just typing few commands, and you can see how you can interact. So as you're developing some scripts on top of it, this is an easier way to do some testing. Now, we have seen some of our customers develop simple things with this framework, and some of people have developed very complex things. We ourselves have used this library to build IT integrations with other IT automation frameworks that are running Python, for example. So the same library has been used to build that integration also. We see this again as a minimal viable product, i.e. we are doing some experiment and we want to see how the community responds. And we are going to continue investing in this, but it would be great if any of you own some Juniper gear and want to try this out. We're happy to hear your thoughts, your feedback on this. So again, very open. We have various open forums. You will have direct line to some of us here. So please do ask us questions, and hopefully we are addressing what is the need of the market. Now, I just wanted to put this complicated picture in front of you just to show you that at Juniper, when we are thinking about building products, we are not just building products. We think about building platforms that have APIs that you can interact with. So we have a whole suite of products that have APIs exposed to it. Okay. So for example, our network management system called JUNOS Space, which is in the center, it provides you APIs to collect topology information. So if you are trying to do something, push some policies across different topology, you can use JUNOS Space API to extract that topology and then write Python application or Chef application to configure that topology. Excuse me. So you can see the mindset that we have around building products and making sure that they are automatable. Actually, one of the things that we are currently engaged is building recipes and cookbooks to automate across the whole portfolio. So tomorrow, when you are trying to set up a tour, there should be a recipe there that instantly sets it up. Day after, you are ready for the new revolution in networking called software-defined network, and you need to set up a Contrail controller. Well, there is going to be a recipe for that, and it will be done in minutes. So the idea is that we're going to continue building and simplifying things so that you can quickly experiment with the network and get your job done faster, more efficient, error-free way. So that's all I had for this presentation. I will pause, see whether there are more questions. If not, maybe I'll encourage some of the Juniper team to ask questions. Go ahead.
I wonder if you have any experience with any clients or anybody out there that's trying to adopt it. I think many people in this audience are totally sold into configuration management, Chef, et cetera. We have a hard sell sometimes to some of the older wisdom folks on the network side. My question more directly is, do you have a pattern for additive changes where we can, for instance, go to said network team that has the Control-C, Control-V, 10-year-old generated config file and say, great, I'm adding a new database or I need a new community link. I guarantee that I've got a test suite or that I'm only making additive changes so that we can start to build some confidence from the network side that we can partner with that?
Yeah, so for that, what I would recommend is looking at the Python library, because what you can do is you can take existing configuration, existing scripts, and kind of wrap it and work along with that. So as you're building new functionality, you build that in Python while keeping all the old stuff around and still useful. So
The only path in is through this. So you essentially take the existing config, take it as a template, and then every new change going forward, be it new automated or old manual, has to come in through the Python template inside.
So I want to say yes, but I'm sure that I'm gonna tick off a few more people somewhere else saying, hey, that's not how. So actually, we are not prescribing a way to do it because there are different needs for different customers. The typical, where are we seeing the most interest right now? The most interest that we are seeing is in data center world, where actually, to be very frank, we are seeing a lot of requests in data center world for Chef and Puppet capabilities on our boxes. So that's where we'll see how things evolve. We fully recognize that some of our existing customers, large, big, old customers, are not deploying this newer IT automation tools, and we want to address their needs also, and that's why we built that Python framework, so that we can address a more NetOps specific problems and not IT automation problems. But like I said, we are starting this journey. Let's see how it evolves.
So if you do it in Chef, is it not additive?
It is additive.
Okay.
The
So the success side from other vendors is the call up on which is exactly what the photos said, which is how do you think about starting a get them into a code. They need to be trusted on something. I mean, you laugh, but there's I'm going to a company next week, largest telecom in the world, that is actually running the same an outpost to a virtual box that actually runs emulated mini tests environment to see if the structure works. So yeah, I know the network guys, like, they don't want to hear this. Right? This out
Exactly.
But I do think, it's my point, I love Chef. I was born on Chef. I was a 90% of work. I'm still a stockholder, right? So, I think the approach of trying to show them, I mean, the VLAN stuff is great for data centers. If you run an OpenStack, you want to provision a new a multi-tenant network, bang. But you start going to the sysadmins and showing them these abstractions, they're going to ask the same, I'm new to that. They're going to ask the same question I'm asking. Like, wait, let me show you a real config of my switch. And they're not going to make that connection between these three perimeters that you have. And by the way, Puppet has the same three perimeters, and so does Ansible, and so does CF Engine, right? So my personal, take it for what it's worth, if that was to be very much what you were describing. Start with abstraction, some form of templating, get them into the same flow that you're doing.
And the reason why I personally, if I was coming from outside the network world, trying to encourage some form of automation, and this is the approach I take because my job involves talking to network engineers all day, is the Chef work concept. I love it. I think it's great, but I've already been sold on Chef for configuration management, right? But if you're trying to approach someone who doesn't come from that whole background, and you don't want to spend an hour explaining Chef infrastructure and all of this, you take a template, you ask them for an exact config they have, you find all the things that are variables, you extract the what from the how, and you go, this is you trusted network guy, this is your config. You design it, you have complete control, and when you automate that to a template, what he sees is, here is my config that I created and I own in exactly how I read it. And that was part of that reasoning is the Chef works perfectly for people who are already sold, and the ability to build on-the-fly templates is the crawl, walk, run mentality of here is exactly how, and you can make massive strides in that on day one. It just depends how complex of a template you want to start with. And I've done that for adding BGP neighbors, adding OSPF interfaces, all of those things, because it's smart person, tell me what that looks like. We will find the variables, we will push that to a switch, a router, a file.
Okay, let's take one more question.
Your Chef client running on the router, do you provide any sort of OHI data
Yes.
there? And what does that look like, or what are you telling me out of the box?
Usually the model number, the OS that it is running, the which OS image versions, the facts about the box itself, how many ports and memory and CPU. So the typical stuff that you will see.
So facts is a fundamental component in both libraries, regardless of whether we displaying that through OHIVE. We've built that as, even programmatically, you can say device.facts, for example, right?
Yeah, first Hello World program.
One way to pull that out by a knife, right? And being that it's in the library, any additional facts you want to add to the library or expose via OHIVE, you can again utilize that by a knife. They're in GitHub accepting pull requests. Let us know if you want.
Okay, I think we may be running out of time. Is it? Yeah, it's 3 p.m. So let's pause here. We will all be hanging out. The Juniper team will be hanging out in booth 110. So if you have more questions, please do stop by. And thank you for your attention and time.